actually knew the Jewish partisans knew that we will never survive. So the only thing was, while we are alive, to take revenge.
Mm-hmm. That was your feeling all the time?
That was the feeling, to take revenge for the innocent people they killed, for no reason.
That's the voice of the late Rubin Pinsky, a Holocaust survivor who came to Canada after the war. He was speaking to an interviewer filming his testimony for the Vancouver Holocaust Education Centre, where Pinsky was one of the founders and an educator at local high schools. The stories he told the public and his own 3 children helped Rubin's son Bernard Pinsky write the new gripping story of his father's remarkable life. It's called Ordinary Extraordinary, and it covers nearly 100 years and focuses on Rubin's time hiding in the forests of Poland for 2 years, together with his older sister, and serving as a fierce teenage partisan hunting Nazis. It includes what happened after the Holocaust, when in 1948 Canada finally accepted Jewish refugees from DP camps, but only 2,500 of them, and they were tailors. So Rubin boldly faked his way onto a ship full of qualified tailors bound for Canada, even though he couldn't sew for beans. Bernard Pinsky actually wrote most of his manuscript 25 years ago. It sat basically untouched for years until his wife bugged him and made him realize it was high time the book saw the light of day. Pinsky launched the book just a few months ago in Vancouver after October 7th, the worst mass killing of Jews since the Holocaust. Always mindful of his father's lifelong optimism, despite what the older Pinsky had lived through.
I think he'd be disappointed like all of us, but I think he would say to us all, we have to keep fighting. We'll get through this. We always have.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, May the 6th, 2024. Yom HaShoah, the day when we remember the 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis and the martyrs and resistance fighters like Rubin Pinsky.
Is life really miserable for the Jews, or are we just glued to a 24-hour news cycle?
Should we be worried that so many young rabbis are coming out of seminary as anti-Zionists?
And what does Judaism say about polyamory?
If you want answers to these questions, well, we don't have any. But we do love asking them. Each week, tune into Bonjour Chai to hear debates and hot takes by me, Avi Feingold,
And me, Phoebe Maltz-Bovey,
as we sit down with pundits, rabbis, and scholars to talk about the most pressing issues facing Jews in Canada and around the world.
Listen and subscribe to Bonjour Chai at thecjn.ca/bonjour or wherever you get your podcasts.
The biography about him introduces us to a young Rubin who was born into an Orthodox family in Jatlowo, Poland, in 1924, although that area now is part of Belarus. Before the Second World War, the Pinskys ran a produce business and a home bakery. Rubin left home to attend yeshiva. When the Russians came and occupied the town, his oldest brother Herzl was conscripted into the Russian army. 2 years later, the Germans invaded. They built a ghetto, rounded up all the able-bodied Jews, including Rubin, who was home by then, 16 years old and fit. He was forced to build roads, but after work and after dark, Rubin used to sneak back into the family's old abandoned house, which was outside the ghetto, to dig up the crop of potatoes they'd planted. That helped sustain his parents and 2 sisters for quite a while.
From time to time, the Germans used to check every bundle of wood or on the person. Anybody who was found with something was shot right away.
So you were lucky you were never...
Yes,
You
I
were
was
never
lucky.
caught. But it must have been frightening each time.
Oh, yes. I mean,
Yeah, it's a
to
risk.
risk with my life all the time.
Eventually, a year later, in April 1942, everybody who wasn't useful was ordered to march or ride to the nearby forests, where they were all shot and killed in large pits, including Pinsky's parents and a baby sister. Days later, Rubin and his older sister Chasia fled to the forests and joined a roving band of Russian and Jewish partisans. For 2 years, the siblings evaded capture while blowing up train tracks, sabotaging Nazi barracks, even killing some enemy soldiers and collaborators. All this despite having to scrounge for berries, eat tree bark sometimes to survive. Rubin nearly died of typhus. He recovered with his sister's help and a dose of pure alcohol. He weighed 85 pounds, but was able to fight off a hungry timber wolf who wanted the wild rabbit the siblings needed for their own meal. On this Holocaust Remembrance Day, Here's my conversation with the author, Bernard Pinsky.
I've never been called an author by anybody before. This is my first time, so I'm honored. Thank you for today.
Well, I'm honored for having read your book. I get the feeling, and I'm making this up in my mind, so correct me if I'm wrong, but part of it is your struggle too. This book is about the incredible resilience and risk and bravery and courage that your father, his sister, uncle did in order to survive. But part of it, is it your own struggle to realize what your dad actually had to do to become the ordinary father you knew?
Right. Look, a lot of people were not going to fight to stay alive. I mean, think of fighting all the time and trying to survive all the time. And you get tired, you get awfully tired of anything that feels hopeless. And people will give up. And my father didn't give up, and my aunt didn't give up. And they were in difficult circumstances, and they never gave up. I mean, it was easier to just get in line and let them shoot you, because the tsuris, the difficulties, the hardships, the starvation, the pain, it's all over if you do that. And so he didn't.
Why did he never want to take what he used to call blood money, Nazi blood money, but other people call war crime reparations from Germany? Because it would have helped, wouldn't it? A lot.
It would have helped.
Family situation.
Yeah. He just thought that taking their money would be a form of forgiveness. And he didn't want to forgive them. Didn't want them to feel, okay, I did something bad, but I paid for it, so it's okay. It just never was okay.
If I remember, he's one of the people who helped found the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center and became a popular speaker in classrooms.
Well, I wouldn't say he was a popular speaker.
Yeah.
He did speak. You know, my memories of it was that he had a very hard time speaking, and he got very emotional, and maybe that's not such a popular thing, but he did speak when he could. And so he did his share, I guess, with other people, but at some point he decided he couldn't anymore. And that was in the 80s.
And you said that he was so gentle in the way he spoke about his stories that it did not give you trauma.
Yeah, he would sit on our bed, and he wouldn't talk about being hounded or killed. He would just say things that he did, and
did you believe him as a young child?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, these are stories you almost couldn't make them up. I mean, he because there were so many of them. I mean, he gave such detail about his life in the forest. It was, sort of blazoned in my mind, which is why I had to write it.
Why wait 25 years to publish it, though?
I just felt compelled to write the story of my father, mainly because he was just such an ordinary person, and my mother's family had some, very bright people who hadn't gone through the Holocaust. They were born in Canada, and they went to university, and they got their PhDs, and they became math champions. And my dad just seemed like very ordinary and plain compared to them. But as I learned more about my father's life, I thought, wow, he is making an incredible life for himself and his family, a good life, even though it was struggle to make a living. And he didn't have the advantages, and he came here as an adult, and he didn't know a word of English, and he just made a family, a good family. And so I felt that I needed to write something about the stories he had told me so nicely and gently, and in a way that didn't give me any trauma, or my sister and brother. And so I decided to write the story of his life for his birthday, as a birthday present, and I worked on it for about a year, and I gave it to him for his 72nd birthday. He was already at a stage where he never was into reading English very much anyway. He read Yiddish. And so I don't really think he read it. Certainly not all of it, but parts of it probably. And I told him about it, and he was excited, and he gave me all the wonderful feedback that I would have hoped to get, but I think he felt good about it. And the fact that he didn't read it was okay. So I didn't expect to do anything further with it. One of my mother's cousin's husband, he said, you should submit it, or I'll submit it for you to Yad Vashem and see if they accept it as a Holocaust history of the town, etc. And I said, sure. And a few months later, I got a letter from Yad Vashem, said, your manuscript, and it wasn't a book, it was a manuscript, has been accepted at Yad Vashem, and we will put it into our archives. And I thought, wow, that's a great honor. And I felt good about that. And that was probably 1997. But that was it for about 10 years. And then around 2007, I got a very strange letter from a person who said that they were a teacher, very bad English, and basically said, I'm a teacher, I'm a history teacher at a high school in a town called Jatlovo. She said, I was in Yad Vashem and I found your manuscript and I'd like to translate it into Russian. And I'm thinking to myself, Jatlovo, what is Jatlovo? So I Googled it and found that Jatlovo was the Russian name of the town my father called Jetl. So, I wrote back to her and said, sure, go ahead and keep in touch. And my brother got excited, Max, and he actually decided a year and a half later to do a roots trip with his daughter Rachel to Jatlovo in February of 2009. The town had just received them like royalty. They had a high school event for them. Made me think that I have to do this too, even though I had never wanted to go there, and my dad never wanted to go back. I eventually did go back, and it was quite an amazing experience being there. This Jana, who contacted me, she's just a saint, that she decided, because of not knowing that there had been a Jewish community there, to really get involved with making the memory of the Jewish community be prevalent in that town.
You said a lot of kaddishes while you were there at all the different places where family members had been murdered.
Yeah.
Tell me what you did, how you found all those places. Describe what it was like.
So Jana and others who had been active for a couple of years already in trying to create memorials for Holocaust victims, they knew where atrocities had happened. So with them, we would go to different places. The one that was most upsetting for me was walking the 2 kilometers from the town to where my grandparents and aunts were killed. They would basically walk there, and there was a street, and there was houses on the street, and everybody in the houses were told by the Nazis to put pillows on the windows and don't come out of the house at a certain time, and don't answer if anyone calls you, if anyone's speaking, don't answer anything, just keep quiet in your house. And the Jews who were marched along that walk pretty much knew what was going to happen, and they were calling to their neighbors, and they were saying things, and I can only imagine what they were saying, and they were marched about 2 kilometers from town, and near the road there was a big hole. Maybe they were forced to dig the hole, and they were all shot. And that's where there's a memorial that was protected by the town, by different organizations, or get turns, and they're supposed to keep it clean and protect it from vandalism. And that's what they do. They do a good job of that. That was the hardest thing that I did.
Why did you write that you felt redeemed by saying a lot of kaddishes in Belarus? What did you need to be redeemed from?
I guess not so much redeemed, but I was able to pay my respects to those who had perished, and to some extent they died, and I was given a new life in a new country. So to some extent that's redeemed, because I don't know where I would have been if I would have been alive at all had my father not come to Canada. So I guess I felt I owed them something to honor their memories.
So you're launching your book 25 years after it was written. What's different in it than what a little manuscript tella that you call it? What did you add?
Right. So I added, first of all, I wrote it while my father was still alive. So I added some materials from the rest of his life and his stroke and his difficulties. And then I added the blog from my trip, my roots trip. And I added the Tailor project.
When you started this book, you got a call from a woman who was researching the Tailor project, which is the quote unquote way of talking about it. But it was a scheme in the end of the war to bring garment workers to Canada as a way to sort of get through the blockage of the Canadian government's racist policies to bring Jewish refugees. Did your dad actually ever learn to sew at all?
No.
I know he went to the school in Belsen for dental technician, but he never he couldn't sew at all, not even a button.
No, I never saw him sewing. I never saw.
So he's not one of the people considered part of the Tailor project, right? Or is he?
It's really a bit of a mystery because, he wasn't a tailor, and it seems that he got in on the Tailor project, but he didn't go to work in a factory. And so maybe he said, or they decided that he just didn't want to continue working as a tailor and wanted to be a teacher instead. And there was demand.
He was a Hebrew teacher, right? He was
a Yiddish teacher.
Yiddish teacher at the Parrot School.
That's right.
In Winnipeg. It struck me that it's 100 years at your father's birth.
He was born, yes.
And 1948 was when they came to Canada. He was 20 years old when he got off the ship 76 years ago this month. And what a life for 2.5, 3 years in the forest, killing people, blowing up trains, starving, nearly dying of illness, being nursed back to health by his loving sister. So many escapes. It's a miracle that he made it. But you wrote that survival stories also have lots of elements in common.
Well, first, tenacity. You have to be absolutely tenacious to want to stay alive and fight to stay alive. You got to be smart or extraordinarily lucky to escape what was, sure death for most people, even if they were smart and in good shape. You had to be physically very capable. You have to be resourceful, super resourceful, figure out things. How are you going to get some more food? How are you going to stay out of the way of those who would kill you? Maybe persuasive, somebody that you talked into doing something that they otherwise might not have done. There's so many factors that each person. So yeah, I recently checked that the Jewish population of Europe in 1938 was approximately between 9 and 9.5 million people. 6 million of them died. 2/3, 2 out of every 3 people in Europe who was Jewish died in a 6-year span, 5-year span, really. Some people, when they saw the Nazis, what they were doing, some people could afford to leave and immigrate somewhere. We've got some families here who emigrated, and they typically converted in order to get into Canada because they wouldn't get into Canada unless they did so. So there's a family called Bentleys that did that. They converted, and they don't really want to remember their Jewish roots.
Well, your father also had an impact on trauma that he went through, right? Because he didn't believe in God anymore.
Yes.
He was still Jewish, but he
didn't convert.
lost his faith that way.
Right. But interestingly enough, even though he didn't believe in God, he was very, very, very Jewish. And they're not incompatible to not believe in God and be very, very Jewish.
What would he have made of the anti-Semitism that we're now experiencing today?
Well, one of the main points I make in the book is that he was an optimist. And I think that he would say, yes, it's tough, but we'll get through this. and we'll get to better times.
I mean, he killed a wolf to get a rabbit to eat. Honestly, he's a lot braver than some guy with a placard on Vancouver protesting on the street against Jews, right?
He was a young man and he was a desperate man. And look,
I wish I would have met him, but it's honored to hear his story. So, and there should be literally a movie playing him. Somebody, I don't know, someone short though. Tom Cruise, he's short.
Yeah, there's something there. He's got too much hair.
Yeah. Right.
Thank
you so much for sharing this story, and congratulations on Ordinary Extraordinary. And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, sponsored by Metropia. Integrity, community, quality, and customer care. To learn more about Rubin Pinsky or to order the book, just go to the link in our show notes. I've also put the link in the notes to watch the commemorative ceremonies for Yom HaShoah at Canada's National Holocaust Monument in Ottawa. It starts at 11 o'clock Eastern Time on Monday. And this year, it'll focus on the 80th anniversary of the deportation of over 400,000 Hungarian Jews to their deaths at Auschwitz-Birkenau, which began in May 1944.
So this is the first of the Meanwhile in Canada panels. So we talk about the Christie Pitts riot, which of course happened in
Meanwhile, Prime
1933.
Minister Justin Trudeau was at a private visit Sunday at the Toronto Holocaust Museum, where director Dara Solomon showed him some of the artifacts and arranged for Trudeau to sit down for an intimate conversation with two survivors. The event happened ahead of B'nai B'rith Canada, set to release its annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents later today, which will likely show a massive spike since October 7th. The CJN Daily is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman. Our music is by Dov Beck-Levine. If you like this episode, please share it with your community, and that's the best way we know to grow our audience. Thank you all for listening to the CJN Daily.
Y'all remember that joke from Airplane? The old lady asked for some light reading.
How about this leaflet, famous Jewish sports legends?
But in actuality, that's changing. Jews are crushing it in sports around the world, and we are here to celebrate them.
Sandy Koufax gets his 10th strikeout.
Zach Hyman, his first career hat trick. 41 points for Diddy Avdia. It's Sue Bird's building.
I'm Gabe.
And I'm Jamie.
We love Jews and we love sports, but most of all, we love kvelling over Jews in sports.
Together we host Menschwarmers, the longest running Jewish sports podcast in the world. Listen and subscribe at thecjn.ca and wherever you find your podcasts.